Hey everyone, I'm Nico from Licks of the Beast. In this video, we're going to be taking a closer look at the Riffs of Powerslave. Powerslave was released way back in 1984, and it was already Iron Maiden's fifth album, and second with their long-lasting lineup of Steve, Dave, Adrian, Bruce, and Nico. For many old school fans, Powerslave was Iron Maiden's finest hour, before the more synth-laden and musically complex Somewhere in Time and Seventh Son, but with the experience of 4 albums developing their hard-hitting brand of heavy metal played with speed, intensity, and tight precision. Now, I may not fall in that category as my favorite albums happen to be Somewhere in Time and A Matter of Life and Death, but Powerslave was the album that made me really discover Iron Maiden, and the first album I sat down with, reading the lyrics and staring at the cover artwork as I let myself get lost in the music. So needless to say, it's had a huge impact on me both as a fan and as a musician. This is an album with great vocal melodies, memorable guitar harmonies and solos, powerful drumming, and bass lines that were both creative and aggressive. It's also an album with exceptional riffs that absolutely deserve a closer look. So with that in mind, let's dive into the Riffs of Powerslave. The album starts with what is arguably their most successful and well-known opener, Aces High. The song has incredible harmonies, the verse riff that follows the vocal melody, the staccato pre-chorus, and the chorus is so satisfying, especially with that modulation to G minor and then the dive bomb. It's just awesome stuff. But the standout riff for me is the one they play in the interlude section to bookend the solos. What's really cool about this riff is how it serves as a breakdown with the staccato feel, but it keeps the pace going at the same time so that the song doesn't lose momentum. This is especially true of the Live After Death version, where they keep the picking going to make it more fluid. 2 Minutes to Midnight is next. Let's talk about that killer main riff. So often people will hear this riff as alternating C and D no-root power chords over an A pedal. And that's the wrong way to hear it, because if that were the case, it would still sound good when you added the root. For example, when I add the root to this, it still sounds like a riff. But if I play this, doesn't quite sound right, does it? It's not the same vibe at all. And if you listen to the bass, Steve is playing the A root note throughout. So try listening to the riff as alternating between A minor 7th and A sus4 chords with an A pedal. I think you'll appreciate the subtleties of the riff a little bit more once you hear it that way. Another interesting thing is Adrian's picking. Back in the day, he would play it with all downstrokes except for that last chord where he would play upstrokes, something like this. Since his return to the band, he started playing it with the same pattern that he uses on The Wicker Man: downstrokes on the open string pedal and upstrokes on the chords. And I have to say, I really like the groove of the latter version. Next up is the rare instrumental Lost for Words. The main riff to this one is based on the A Dorian scale. Dorian is like natural minor, but with a raised sixth, which makes it sound a little more uplifting. So here's how the riff would sound if it were in the more typical A natural minor, also known as A Aeolian. Still kind of cool, but it's a bit dull, isn't it? That raised sixth makes it sound so much more majestic. I never realized how sinister and intense this riff was until I heard it in the Italian horror movie Phenomena by Dario Argento. This is the exact opposite of Lost for Words, where the minor sixth gives it that dark sound which is typical of the Aeolian mode. If you were to play it in D Dorian, you'd get this. It sounds a little bit too uplifting, and it loses all of that sinister and foreboding feel that makes this riff so awesome. So you can see how the scales have their specific characteristics, which you can use to create the mood you need for the story you want to tell. The Duelists has one of the simplest main riffs of the album, although it's really cool how the harmony in the second half of the riff is played by Steve on the bass, while the guitars keep playing the three main chords in unison. So the guitars are playing the E, C, and D power chords throughout. And Steve starts off by playing E, C, and D, but then he plays G, E, and F sharp for a harmony in thirds on the second half. So together you get this sound. Back in the Village. What a way to kick off side 2 of this masterpiece. I'm often asked about how to play the riff to this one, so here it is both at regular speed and slowly. Slowly. The song is mostly in A minor, and the main riff is once again in A Dorian. If the riff were in A Aeolian, or natural minor, it would sound like this. It's still a pretty cool riff, but it doesn't quite stand out the same way. The next part is an A minor pentatonic run that goes something like this. Adrian borrowed this idea from a really cool lick he did previously in his solo on Revelations. This secondary riff really adds to the intro and gives it a bit of a Van Halen-esque vibe. Going back to this riff after the second chorus as a breakdown gives the listener a chance to catch their breath before going into the high-speed interlude, and it's a very clever bit of arranging. That takes us to the title track, Powerslave. Few things are as iconic as that thumping heartbeat over the intense breathing, followed by that hollow scream and Nico's long drum roll, leading to this powerful and menacing riff. This riff features an A pedal in that classic Maiden gallop rhythm and the use of the A Phrygian dominant scale, also known as the Gypsy or Spanish scale. This scale is very common in neoclassical music, and it's easy to see why. It's a very particular sounding scale. It's got a minor second, a minor sixth, and a minor seventh that really give it a dark sound. But the third is major. That makes it a half step further from the second and a half step closer to the fourth compared to a natural minor scale, giving the scale a more exotic sound. Now, you'll notice there is no C note in this scale, and yet they're playing a C power chord in the riff. They're basically just borrowing that C from A natural minor. If they were only using notes from the Phrygian dominant scale, the riff would sound like this. It actually sounds kind of cool, but not quite as impactful. So borrowing that C from the Aeolian mode makes a whole lot of sense in terms of what sounds better for the riff. And I'm quite certain they did this on a very instinctive level based on what sounded and felt good, which is ultimately all that really matters in songwriting. The theory helps contain the information and arrange it in a way that is easily usable, and it also helps explain the music for study purposes like we're doing right now. The album closes with the epic Rime of the Ancient Mariner. This is a very long song with a lot of riffs, so for this video I want to look at two of them. The first one comes at the end of the first half, just before it gets quiet. This riff has a very cinematic quality. At this point in the song, the mariner's life has been won by life in death, which essentially makes him the living dead. He now has to struggle with his realization of being on a boat full of dead crewmen on what feels like a very stormy sea. So this is the storm before the calm, if you will, and this riff captures that feeling perfectly. I've said this before, but Iron Maiden really are the masters of converting imagery to music. This riff feels frantic and it's chaotic, and the tension is heightened by the use of the D sharp chord borrowed from E Lydian. If we were to stick to the notes of E natural minor, we'd have a D instead, and the riff would sound a lot less impactful. Another element to this riff is the octave harmony. Adrian is playing the riff down here, while Dave is playing it up here. This is to add texture and to broaden the sound a little bit. The second riff I wanted to talk about is this breakdown that concludes the instrumental section just before going back into the final verses of the song. Once again, they're using the Phrygian dominant scale, which helps reinforce that exotic, piratey, ship lost at sea imagery. And once again, Adrian is playing the lower notes, and Dave is doubling that line an octave higher. They could have gone with a more traditional harmony in thirds, but it would have darkened the sound a little bit too much. Harmonizing an octave higher gives this line a bigger, more open sound, which is exactly what was needed at this point in the song. So that's it for this week. I hope this was interesting and that it gave you a little more insight into this classic album. Let me know your thoughts and questions in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like and do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you all so much for watching and stay tuned for more licks of the beast.